What's going on? It's David. I'm just here to talk to you today about some ideas relating to development and spiral dynamics and enlightenment and all that kind of good stuff. I was getting on Facebook today and I saw Zachary Fetter, I believe his name is. He was given some kind of a talk at the Integral Conference in 2012 about spiritual singularity. One of the things he's saying is that the next generation of kids growing up as children of enlightened and integral parents, that they're gonna advance and move through stages of development, states and stages, faster and faster because their parents are integral or enlightened. I think this is problematic for a lot of reasons, and let me try to explain why. Let's step back for a minute. One of the things that I notice when I first start talking to people is usually I ask them if they grew up in a religious home. I grew up in a really religious home, and I know for me, I learned a lot of really important lessons at the traditional conformist stage that I still really embody and resonate with. There are main important lessons that you learn at every stage. So at blue, traditional conformist level, you learn to sacrifice yourself for something higher, a higher purpose. At orange, you learn rational thinking. At green, you learn all-embracing love and care. So what I've noticed happens to a lot of people who are raised in non-traditional homes, they're either raised by atheistic parents or, let's say, green postmodernist parents. I have some friends, I'm not going to name names, but I have some friends that were raised in a postmodern culture. And what happens is they take on postmodern values as their traditional values. And the problem with that is that postmodern values are relativistic. And so what happens is when everything is relative, well then I have my truth and you have your truth, and it just becomes kind of narcissistic because that lets me appeal to whatever I like. Whereas in a more traditional kind of blue setting, you learn to sacrifice yourself for some kind of higher purpose. That's the move from blue to red. Red is impulsive, egoic, no, me, mine, I want it now, and blue is supposed to subvert that and get you to sacrifice now for something more later. But what happens is that when people take on the postmodernist values as their traditional dogma, it stops their growth. They can't become integral because they haven't learned the values at the traditional and rational stages. They haven't learned how to sacrifice their ego and live for eternity. They haven't learned how to make rational distinctions. And so because they haven't learned the lessons at those levels, they can't move past green. They haven't even really fully developed up to green. They're taking on green in a dogmatic kind of way. And so the same thing will happen in an enlightened society. If you think about it, in the best, most enlightened society, where the tradition and the system is most functional, people will translate integral values as the new myth, as the new worldview. If there's not a reason for them to struggle with it, if it doesn't create tension, then why would anyone grow past a traditional value? It would be the traditional value of integral values, but it's still only accepted from a blue stage. I could teach a young 10-year-old kid, someone at a traditional stage, I could get them to recite quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. They could get all that. They could recite it. They could believe it as the one true way, but they're not really going to get it until they've gone through the different stages of unfolding to be able to get there. And it's going to be harder and harder and harder. If the value system of the society gets more and more advanced, that slows it down because there's not the tension and the friction to make growth possible. So in some sense, the kids of an atheist or a postmodernist, their traditional conformist stage will probably be healthier as an expression because they won't need to use fear of hell and guilt and all this kind of stuff to get people to be good. You won't have as much racism and stuff like that. So the flavor of the expression of the stage will change. I think that's really the interesting thing about thinking about spiral dynamics and its expression is that as the spiral grows, the expression of the stages changes. But to think that a kid is going to be enlightened because his parents are enlightened, because he'll see the enlightenment in his parents' eyes or whatever, no. Because they're going to only be able to translate any experience from whatever level they're at. So it doesn't matter if their parents are enlightened. If they're going to become enlightened, they have to get there themselves. And even enlightened is not a good way to talk about this necessarily. Are we talking about post-formal cognition? For a lot of people, even enlightenment is a traditional notion. They're adhering to the doctrine. Most post-formal Buddhists will tell you if you see Buddha on the path, you're supposed to kill him. You go past the Buddha. Even Buddhism itself is the way to an awakened reality. realization. It's a practice that will hopefully help you get there. Everybody does start at stage 1 and has to move up through stages. Maybe they will move through states and stages faster, but in some sense, if there's not tension, if there's not struggle, if there's not a problem at the stage that they're at where it's breaking down and it's not working, if there's not that kind of tension and struggle, there's not going to be growth. So if you had something like an enlightened society where it was working really well and there wasn't a lot of tension and people were happy, you would have people translating enlightened values from traditional conformist stages. And probably most people wouldn't make it past a traditional conformist stage. And maybe they wouldn't even need to. If there's no tension, then there's probably no need for growth. One of the questions I'm interested in is, how do you create a healthy unfolding of translation to take somebody from the lower stages at birth all the way up? If you don't know what a healthy unfolding looks like, then maybe it doesn't even make any sense to say what it looks like to be at a stage in a healthy way. One question I often think about is, does healthy translation inevitably lead to transformation? Or is healthy translation something that might block transformation? That's something I struggle with. Okay, one way to make that into a real kind of situation is like, we have these translations, these hacks into Christianity, into Buddhism, into capitalism, conscious capitalism, as if there wasn't a bigger oxymoron to be had. Evolutionary Christianity, another kind of oxymoron, and evolutionary enlightenment. If you had something like trans-rational, post-formal Christianity, at that point, Christianity is undone because we realize that it's just one cultural myth. It's not the one true way, it's just one way of talking about things. And to be really integral would not be to be so attached to one way of talking about things. At a certain point, it's like always speaking in Matrix or Star Wars metaphors. And people are just going to be like, man, do we always have to relate everything back to Star Wars? You just become like the ultimate nerd for one set of symbols. It would seem to me that to really be integral would be to look at universal ideas as they appear in their cultural costumes. So you would do comparative mythology, Joseph Campbell style, and be like, here's yin and yang, and here's the Star of David, and here's the cup and the sword, and here's ones and zeros. These are all different cultural ways of talking about duality and non-duality, comedy and drama. That's what I would think an integral religious system would do. It seems like a healthy translation in that regard would inevitably lead to transformation. Or does a healthy translation mean that you can integrate all 4 quadrants and still be a Christian? If what we're talking about is that we have a really good society that is enlightened and all that, then most people are going to be at a traditional value stage, but their traditional values are going to look different than the traditional values that we have now. So we might call that an enlightened society, but does that mean that most people really understand those ideas, that they're post-formal and that they see them in a more nuanced way where they can see past the words to what they're pointing at, see past the traditional language? Probably not. To be honest, I don't even see a lot of that among so-called integralists now. So just to close it off, I am really skeptical of the possibility of a society where most people are in second tier. I don't think it's possible, honestly. I think the best that you could possibly get is enlightened leadership. Maybe enlightened leadership will transform the spiral so that way it's the case that lower stages of development, traditional, modern, and postmodern, are more healthy expressions of those stages. But I still think that most people, even in an enlightened society, are going to find themselves towards the higher stages in first tier, probably not getting into second tier. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. And I'm interested to see what that would look like. I'm also interested to hear how something like that might come about if you think that it is possible. Discuss. Tell me what you think. I look forward to hearing back from you. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Peace.